Welcome back to Beastie Boys and Babylon Noise, my series where we work through the Revelation in little bite-sized chunks, going here about a few verses at a time. Basically, we take 10 minutes. I'm J.R. Foresteros, and you're seeing this through my Substack, so thank you for tuning in, and especially if you're already a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. We are in the second vision cycle in Revelation, which began in chapter 4 when John was called up into heaven by an angelic visitor. And then we began, you may remember, in uh, sorry, I'm trying to get my sweet picture. There we go. We began in the throne room, and John is just kind of seeing all of this stuff happening, and it's amazing him. And then he begins to grieve because there is no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth who can open the scroll that he sees that the one who is seated on the throne is holding. We talked about how that scroll represents God's will for the world. And sure enough, if you looked around John's world, or our world for that matter, you'd see it doesn't seem as though God's will is being done here on earth as it is in heaven. So John wept, but then the angel said that the Lion of Judah was coming to conquer. And so John looks, and then instead of the lion, he sees the always slaughtered lamb, which is the image of Jesus that Revelation is going to use throughout. So John sees the always slaughtered lamb take the scroll. All of heaven erupts into worship because it is the very fact that Jesus has been slain that makes him worthy to open the scroll. And so he holds the scroll in his hand. It has 7 seals on it. And over the last couple of weeks, we watched as Jesus began opening the seals. And we saw this relationship between heaven and earth, where as Jesus would unseal each of the seals, something would happen on the earth. So we first saw the first set of 4, which was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And then we saw the martyrs under the altar begging for their deaths to be avenged. And we saw a great earthquake that was called the earthquake of the wrath of the Lamb. And that ended with the kings of the earth calling out, who could be saved from the wrath of the Lamb? And so that brings us to today, where we are talking about who survives the apocalypse. And now we're in chapter 7. And so there's this really fascinating juxtaposition that goes on here with the scroll that is being unsealed, and then we're told that there is another group of people, and they're the famous 144,000 who come from the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, there are a number of interpreters who want to take this literally. Famously, the Left Behind guys talked about how this is going to be literally the restoration of the 12 tribes of Israel who have been lost to history. And the Jehovah's Witnesses for a long time said that only 144,000 people were going to make it into heaven. It was great for recruiting. And then when they hit that, then they had to change the recruiting pitch to say that only 144,000 get to the best heaven. So still a pretty good recruiting pitch. Anyway, I think what's interesting about this text is if you look at who the 12 tribes are that are listed, they do not match who the actual 12 tribes are in the Hebrew Bible. For instance, Dan is not in here, and that's because Dan was kind of the black sheep tribe of the ancient Israelites. They were the ones that were always being pagan and doing bad stuff, right? So there's some clear indicators that John, who was almost certainly Jewish himself and who certainly knew his Hebrew Bible very well, really did intend for us not to take this literally, which wouldn't be a huge surprise because we've taken nearly nothing in this book literally so far, right? Instead, what John is wanting us to do is to look at this question of who survives the apocalypse, right? And so you have this group of 144,000 who are gathered on the earth, who are of the people of Israel, but in this metaphorical way that stretches towards not a particular ethnic group, but rather the church. And again, in the first century especially, because the vast majority of the first followers of Jesus were Jewish themselves, they did not see a difference between Judaism and Christianity. They saw them as two well, not even two, as many different riffs on the same theological tradition, and that Jesus was a rabbi who was interpreting the Hebrew scriptures in his particular way. And so even Paul and Peter and the disciples, they understood themselves not as starting a new faith, but as doing the next logical extension of Judaism. So for them to say we are the true Israel was neither an ethnocentric claim because it had been open to Gentiles by that point, but it was also not a exclusivist claim. It was something quite different, as the next scene shows. But I think it's important to note that these 144,000 who are on the earth in the midst of the great earthquake of the wrath of the Lamb are sealed. They're sealed by the Holy Spirit, and this means that they are safe. So we have this really fun, again, juxtaposition going on where John is watching the scroll being unsealed and hell breaking loose on earth. And at the same time as the scroll is being unsealed, all of those who follow Jesus are being sealed. They're being protected from all of this. So the answer to who can stand the great wrath of the Lamb is answered right away. These people who are sealed, these people who are saved, these people who are protected because of their faithfulness to Jesus instead of their allegiance to Rome. Now, what happens next is that we jump up into heaven and we see again the heavenly counterpart. Just like the seals being unsealed on earth has this effect, unsealed in heaven has this effect on earth. So the believers being sealed on earth has an effect in heaven. And we see that as this countless multitude from every nation, tribe, and tongue who's gathered around the throne and who are worshiping together. This is a really powerful moment. And I think it's one that doesn't get enough play because it says that God is not interested in a single ethnic identity in the kingdom of heaven. God is interested in every group of people being represented, all of humanity being rescued and restored. This is sort of the fulfillment of the promise that was made at the Tower of Babel when languages were confused and people were scattered all over the earth, because that was God's original intention. In the garden, when God created the man and the woman, God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So multiculturalism was always God's design. Multi-ethnicity was always God's intention. And we see that honored here in heaven when all of these races and nations and peoples bring their languages and bring their cultures. We're going to see it again, spoilers, in Revelation 21 and 22 at the very end, but we see it very clearly here. And I think that matters when we talk about the state of authoritarianism that we live in today, because fascism insists on privileging a particular group. It's usually a singular culture or a race or a gender. Hierarchy is part and parcel of how fascism works, and ranking and putting everything into this, this top-down category with, of course, the demagogues and the people like them on the very top. And so that's why in our current moment, DEI is under attack. It's why LGBTQ is under attack. It's why women are under attack, because it benefits those who are in power right now, the authoritarians and the fascist demagogues, to restore hierarchy. And so if we are going to be serious about resisting authoritarianism, we should be paying special attention to the calls for homogeneity in our culture. We should be looking at who's calling for them and how they're calling for them. We should be paying attention to the disingenuous rhetoric they use to attack DEI, or to attack women's autonomy over their own bodies, or to attack LGBTQ plus people, as we've been seeing from this latest mass shooting, and how it has suddenly become an issue about trans rights instead of about gun control. If you're majority culture like me, I'm a cis hetero white dude, it means we need to educate ourselves. It means we need to be taking this time to become the best possible allies we can, because we are going to be those who benefit from the system that is being implemented by the demagogues. And so we need to make sure that we are attending to the power that we have and leveraging it for the good of our larger community. And we can't do that without being educated and without listening to the voices of those who are more marginal than us. And then finally, we have to organize. The Trump administration put forth a plan called Project 2025 that laid out in very clear detail exactly their strategy for how to dismantle our democracy and instill a fascist regime, and they're executing it to the letter. We need to be just as organized. As Jesus said, we need to be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And so that requires us to learn the tools of fascism, to learn the talents and the strategies of those who would oppress us. And we need to make sure that we do a better job of resisting than they do of implementing. That's what Revelation is calling for. That's what our day and time in this moment is calling for. Okay, we're out of time for this week. I'm so sorry that I had to take a couple of weeks off, but I look forward to being back into our normal Wednesday rhythm. I will tell you that next week we're going to take another little pause and do some of the big sort of what I like to call imagination questions. We're going to ask, what do the ancient Hebrews think when they think about God's wrath? Because that's obviously playing in really big here. And how does that prime us to understand what John is doing here? Because now that the scroll is open, we're going to be preparing to read it, and so we should be prepared for more shenanigans and more insanity. But that'll be in the coming weeks. So for now, I'd love to hear what you think about the sealed believers and the countless multitude. I'd love to hear how you think we can work together to resist the attacks on racial, sexual, and gender equity. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the comments here and in our conversations throughout the week. Until next week, grace and peace be with you.